It started with a small, almost forgettable moment, a simple itch on my backbone that I couldn't quite reach. I remember standing by the window of my apartment, sunlight spilling through the blinds, feeling that faint, irritating tickle. Ryan was in the kitchen, his voice half distracted as he talked to a client over the phone. I called out to him once, twice. He didn't hear me, or maybe he did and chose not to. That small silence told me more than words could. So I laughed it off, picked up my phone, and texted an old name that had popped into my mind the night before, Liam Hart, that we hadn't spoken in years. College had ended, life had scattered us into different cities, and we'd only exchanged the occasional birthday message. Yet when he replied almost instantly, it felt as if time folded back on itself. "Hey, Ethan. It's been forever. Coffee?" By that afternoon, we were sitting across from each other in a small cafe downtown. Liam looked almost the same messy brown hair, same easy grin, but there was something calmer in his eyes now, something grounded. I told him about work, about Ryan, about the kind of quiet that had begun filling the corners of my life. He listened like he always had, really listened, leaning forward, elbows on the table, eyes locked on mine as if my words actually mattered. It was strange how quickly the air between us felt familiar. When I laughed, he laughed too, but his laughter carried warmth rather than politeness. He didn't check his phone once. He didn't interrupt. For a while, I forgot that my life outside this cafe felt like an unfinished sentence. When we finally stepped out into the cool afternoon, Liam walked me to my car. I turned to say goodbye, but that old itch on my back flared up again. I twisted my arm, trying to reach it, and Liam chuckled. "Still can't reach that spot, huh?" he said, teasing like he used to in college whenever I got sunburned on beach trips. "Never could," I admitted, laughing. Without hesitation, he reached out and scratched lightly where I pointed. It lasted only a few seconds, barely a moment, but something in the air shifted. Maybe it was the familiarity of touch, or maybe the unspoken history behind it. I felt my chest tighten, not out of attraction, but out of longing, for closeness, for being seen, for something I hadn't realized I'd been missing. That we both laughed it off, the way people do when they sense something deeper than they're ready to name. "Guess some things never change," Liam said. "Yeah," I replied, but my voice came out quieter than I meant. That night, Ryan came home late again. He tossed his keys onto the counter and started scrolling through emails. I asked about his day. He nodded without looking up. I mentioned seeing Liam. He said, "That's nice," in the same tone he used when I told him the water bill arrived. As I stood behind him, watching the light from his phone glow against his face, I felt a strange distance, like looking through glass. I wanted to reach out, to remind him that I was still there, that we used to talk until midnight about everything and nothing. But the words sat heavy on my tongue. Instead, I went to bed early. Lying there in the dark, I thought about Liam's laugh, the way his eyes met mine without drifting elsewhere. I thought about that brief, ridiculous moment when he scratched my back, and how it lingered longer than it should have. It wasn't about desire, it was about attention. About feeling like someone actually noticed the small things, the ones Ryan used to notice too. The next morning, Ryan left early for a meeting. He kissed me on the forehead like he always did, mechanical and half awake. The apartment felt colder after he left. I made coffee, stared at the cup, and wondered when warmth had become something I associated with absence. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Liam. "You free this weekend? I could use a walk and some company." For a moment, I hesitated. It felt harmless, a walk, an old friend. Yet there was a flicker of guilt beneath the surface, faint but persistent. I pushed it aside. Guilt for what? Talking to someone who cared enough to ask how I was? We met again that Saturday. The park was quiet, early autumn air filled with drifting leaves. We walked for hours, talking about everything, music, jobs, people we used to know. The conversation flowed easily, but beneath it, there was a quiet awareness. Liam had a way of asking questions that reached under the surface, questions Ryan no longer asked. At one point, we stopped by the lake. The wind picked up, scattering ripples across the water. Liam looked at me and said, "You seem different. Quieter than before." I tried to smile. "Just tired, I guess." He nodded, but I could tell he didn't believe me. "You used to light up when you talked about things. Now it's like you're trying not to feel too much." His words hit deeper than I expected. I wanted to tell him everything, that I felt invisible in my own home, that I missed being understood without having to explain myself. But I didn't. I just stared at the water and said, "Yeah, maybe I've just grown up." He looked at me for a moment longer, then changed the subject. But even as we walked on, his earlier words lingered, echoing in the hollow spaces I tried to ignore. When I got home that evening, Ryan was on a call again. He waved when he saw me but didn't hang up. I sat on the couch, scrolling through my photos, and paused at one Liam had taken of us by the lake. It wasn't romantic, it was just two friends smiling at the camera. Yet something about it unsettled me. Maybe because, in that picture, I looked like someone who still felt alive. That I locked the phone and stared at the ceiling. I told myself it was nothing. That people drift apart and reconnect all the time. That friendship didn't have to mean more. Still, as I lay there, I couldn't shake the feeling that something small had begun to move beneath the surface of my life, quiet, invisible, but unstoppable. That it wasn't love. It wasn't even temptation. It was awareness, the kind that creeps in when you've been numb too long. And that night, when I closed my eyes, I found myself thinking of that ridiculous, innocent moment again, standing in the sunlight, asking my friend to scratch an itch I couldn't reach, but this time, the itch didn't feel like something on my skin. It felt like something deeper, something waking up inside me. "Why," I whispered to myself in the dark, "did a simple touch feel like something more?" The weekend with Liam had left an echo in my chest, one I couldn't shake even as Monday rolled around. Work was routine, mechanical, the hum of computers, the low murmur of colleagues, but my mind drifted. Ryan barely noticed me anymore, not the way he used to. Even small gestures had become automatic, the quick smile, the nod, the mechanical brush of hands as we passed each other in the apartment. There was no warmth behind it, no curiosity, no lingering attention. By mid-morning, my phone buzzed again. "Liam. Coffee later?" I hesitated, fingers hovering over the screen, but before I could second-guess myself, I typed, "Sure." The text felt inconsequential, harmless, but my pulse betrayed me. Ryan would be home late, too wrapped up in work to notice a casual meeting with an old friend. And yet, the thought gnawed at me that we met in the same small cafe, the one with the cracked tiles and the smell of fresh pastries that never seemed to leave the air. Liam arrived first, hands in the pockets of his jacket, eyes scanning until they found mine. His grin was effortless, and in it, I felt the old comfort of familiarity, like slipping into a worn jacket you'd forgotten how soft it was. We ordered coffee, sat near the window where the sunlight pooled like liquid gold. The conversation began lightly, about mutual friends, the ridiculousness of adult life, the small irritations of jobs and bills. But gradually, the talk deepened, as if we were moving through layers we had always known existed. Liam asked questions that cut through casual talk. "Do you feel happy these days? Do you feel heard?" Every question felt like a small spotlight, illuminating spaces I had ignored for too long. That I caught myself speaking honestly, more honestly than I had in months. About Ryan's absences, about my frustration, about the sense that something vital had slipped quietly from our relationship. Liam listened without judgment, his expression soft, his eyes intent. He didn't offer clichés. He didn't try to fix me. He simply held the space for me to be seen. That act, simple as it was, felt like a lifeline. Hours passed. We wandered the streets after leaving the cafe, the crisp air of late autumn brushing against our faces. I felt lighter, freer, yet a quiet tension threaded through the ease of our laughter. There was a vulnerability between us now, a delicate line we were tiptoeing along without naming it. Liam brushed a stray leaf from my shoulder, and I felt a strange, flickering awareness in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't desire. It was recognition. The recognition of being understood, of being noticed in ways I hadn't realized I had been starving for. The walk ended near a small park, where the trees were shedding their golden leaves. We sat on a bench, shoulders brushing, and the conversation drifted into memories, college nights, shared jokes, late-night walks back from parties. I laughed more easily than I had in a long time, but there was a shadow beneath the laughter, the knowledge that this ease existed in contrast to my life with Ryan. Liam turned to me, his expression softer than usual. "You're carrying a lot," he said quietly. "More than you let on." I wanted to deny it, to deflect with humor, but instead I nodded. "Yeah," I admitted. "I guess I didn't realize how much until now." The truth of it was like a weight lifting and pressing all at once. I wanted to tell him everything, how lonely I felt in my own apartment, how neglected, how small the world seemed with Ryan constantly distant. But I stopped short. Instead, I said, "It's not all bad. I just miss feeling like someone's really there, you know." Liam didn't answer immediately. He just shifted closer on the bench, a subtle, careful proximity that didn't overstep but was undeniably comforting. "I know," he said softly. "And I'm here, if you need it." The words were innocent, yet they resonated deeper than I expected. They weren't a promise of more than friendship. They weren't a declaration. They were simply acknowledgement. And that acknowledgement felt almost dangerous in its intensity. I realized then that I had been starved, not for romance, not for passion, but for attention, for someone noticing the small, invisible pieces of me. Later, when we parted, I walked back to my apartment in a daze, the crisp air failing to clear the fog in my mind. Ryan was still at work, or so I assumed. The apartment felt colder than usual, the silence heavier. I made myself a cup of tea and sat on the couch, trying to focus on something mundane, anything. But my thoughts kept drifting back to Liam's easy presence, the way he had made room for my words, the subtle comfort of his hand brushing against mine. That night, Ryan came home later than usual. He leaned against the doorway, exhausted, scrolling through his phone. I tried to recount my day, but his attention was elsewhere, his replies short, distracted. I felt a familiar pang of isolation, a quiet recognition that the gap between us had grown too wide for casual fixes. That I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Liam. About how normal and unremarkable the day had seemed until it wasn't. About the comfort, the ease, the subtle intimacy of attention that had gone missing from my life. My chest tightened with a strange mix of guilt and longing. I hadn't crossed any lines, at least not physically, but my heart felt pulled towards something it shouldn't. By the end of the week, our walks became routine. Every encounter with Liam peeled away layers I didn't know I had been hiding. I laughed more easily. I spoke more openly. I felt alive, even if only temporarily. And yet, a persistent question gnawed at me: where did loyalty end, and where did emotional infidelity begin? One evening, after a long walk in the park, Liam paused to look at me, the golden light of the setting sun catching his hair. "You're different," he said, not as an accusation, but as an observation. "Braver. Or maybe just more honest with yourself." I didn't answer immediately. I wanted to, but I wasn't sure what truth I could give. I had discovered a part of myself I had neglected, and that part was dangerous in its clarity. Dangerous because it revealed gaps, silences, and absences I had accepted for too long. And as I walked back alone, through streets softened by evening lights and rustling leaves, I realized that the itch on my back, the one that had seemed so trivial at first, had become a metaphor. It wasn't just a physical irritation. It was a symbol of what I needed, what I was missing, and what I had almost forgotten could exist: attention, understanding, the simple act of being truly seen. That I didn't know what the next step would be, or whether I could navigate the minefield of emotions that had quietly grown between Ryan and me. But I knew one thing: something had shifted, and nothing could quite put it back the way it was before, and that, I realized with a mix of anticipation and dread, was just the beginning. The tension had been building for weeks, subtle yet unrelenting. Every conversation with Liam left me both lighter and heavier at once, lighter because I could finally speak without filtering, heavier because each word reminded me of the distance that had grown between Ryan and me. I tried to convince myself it was harmless, that nothing had crossed a line, but deep down, I felt a quiet unease gnawing at me, persistent and sharp. It was a Thursday evening when the line between comfort and complication finally became visible. Ryan had stayed late at work again, and I was scrolling through messages from Liam, replaying snippets of our walks, our talks, our laughter. Then, a soft knock at the door. I opened it to find Liam standing there, a small, apologetic smile on his face. "Hey," he said. "I know it's late, but I thought maybe we could talk. Just for a few minutes." I hesitated, the familiar surge of guilt washing over me. But there was something in his eyes, in the earnest tilt of his head, that made it hard to say no. I stepped aside, and he entered, carrying nothing but the weight of his presence. We sat on the couch, and for a moment, silence wrapped around us like a fragile thread. "I feel like something's changed," Liam began cautiously. "Between us. And I don't want to make things complicated for you, Ethan, but I also can't pretend I don't notice it." I swallowed, heart pounding. I had tried to ignore it, to label it as harmless, a longing for friendship, for attention, but his words made the truth undeniable. I had allowed myself to rely on him emotionally in ways that should have been reserved for Ryan. I had crossed a line, not with actions, but with the wandering of my heart. "I know," I whispered. I didn't mean for it to happen, but I can't deny it either." Liam reached out, a hand hovering near mine, then pulling back. "It's okay," he said softly. "We don't have to define it. We just need to understand it, and maybe set some boundaries before it hurts anyone." The honesty in his voice, the care and restraint, hit me harder than any physical touch ever could. He wasn't trying to tempt me further. He was acknowledging the truth and giving me a choice, an opportunity to step back before things became destructive. I realized then that the affection I had felt toward him was genuine, but it was also fleeting in the sense that it belonged to a space that wasn't mine to occupy fully. The following days were tense. I avoided Liam's messages more than I wanted, aware that every reply might pull me back into the emotional swirl I was trying to escape. Ryan, sensing the change, became more observant. One evening, he found me staring blankly at my laptop, scrolling through old photos of Liam and me at the park. His voice was quiet, but the edge was unmistakable. "Ethan, who are you thinking about so much?" My stomach tightened. I knew he wasn't asking out of casual curiosity. He could feel the distance that had grown, the emotional drift I hadn't been able to explain. I tried to deflect, but Ryan pressed gently, insisting on honesty. And for the first time in weeks, I confessed, not about a physical act, not about anything concrete, but about my emotional reliance on Liam, about how he had made me feel noticed, alive, and understood. Ryan listened in silence, and I feared the worst. But his face didn't twist with anger or judgment, it softened with something I hadn't expected: hurt, yes, but also understanding. I didn't realize," he said quietly. "I've been so caught up with work, I didn't see how distant I had become. And I understand why you turned to him, even if it shouldn't have happened." The conversation was painful but necessary. It revealed the fragility in our relationship, the gaps that had allowed emotional infidelity to take root. Ryan and I talked for hours that night, about neglect, about needs, about the ways we had failed each other without even noticing. I realized that my heart's wandering wasn't solely my fault, it was a symptom of something that had been missing for far too long. When I finally met Liam again, it was with clarity and purpose. We sat on the same bench in the park, the autumn leaves swirling around our feet, and we spoke honestly. I can't do this," I said, voice trembling slightly. "I care about you, more than I expected to, but I can't let this interfere with my life, with my relationship." Liam nodded, a small, sad smile on his lips. "I know," he said softly. "And I care about you too." But maybe caring isn't always about being close. Sometimes it's about letting go in the right way. There was a strange peace in that moment, bittersweet but undeniable. We didn't hug. We didn't reach for each other. But there was understanding, a shared acknowledgement of what had been and what had to end. I realized that emotional infidelity doesn't always manifest in physical acts. It can exist in the space where hearts lean on the wrong shoulders, where intimacy fills a void it wasn't meant to occupy. That I walked back home that evening with a mixture of relief and sorrow. I knew Ryan and I had work to do, but I also knew the truth had been laid bare. We couldn't repair everything overnight, but we could begin. And that, perhaps, was the most honest form of love, the willingness to confront failure, to face gaps and silences, and to rebuild from the foundation of truth. The next morning, I found Ryan making coffee, humming softly, as if trying to stitch the edges of our life back together. I joined him, and for the first time in months, the gesture felt reciprocal, not mechanical, not distracted, but present. I realized that love, fragile as it is, can survive absence and neglect if both hearts are willing to see each other again. Later, I called Liam. He answered after a brief pause. "Hey," he said. His voice carried no accusation, no tension, only warmth and respect. "Hey," I replied. "I just wanted to thank you. For everything. And for understanding." We spoke briefly, not about feelings or longing, but about the ease of friendship and the value of honesty. When we hung up, I felt a weight lift, a mixture of closure and gratitude. I had been tempted, I had been swayed, but I had also been given a choice, and I had chosen integrity. That night, lying in bed beside Ryan, I felt a quiet certainty. The itch on my back, the one that had started it all, was gone, replaced by a deeper awareness. Attention, understanding, and presence were not things to borrow from someone else. They were things to nurture in the life I already had, in the hearts that mattered most. And as I drifted to sleep, I realized that sometimes, the smallest irritations lead to the largest awakenings. The moments that seem trivial, like a scratch on the back, can uncover truths we weren't ready to see. But seeing them, acknowledging them, and choosing to act honestly, that is where real courage begins.